Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is finishing off the Ukraine news for the day. I have done a Syria update, somewhat extensive update, at least as far as I'm concerned, for my channel. Please go and check that out. I just want to add a couple of bits to that. I don't want to take up too much time on Syria, but I did mention that Assad might have been, or his plane might have been lost, might have been shot down. There were some rumours going around, but I did say there were rumours. Turns out that, or at least according to the Russians officially, that he and his family have arrived in Moscow and that Russia has granted him asylum. Quote, according to TASS, Assad and his family members arrived in Moscow. Russia, based on humanitarian considerations, granted them asylum. So that has happened. And I'm just going to go through this little thread from Tendar because I think it's really useful to get a understanding of how this might affect Russia. So you've got Syria up there, and you've got these nations in Africa, and of course Iran just over there. So the collapse of the Assad regime is for Russia a far worse catastrophe than most realise. It will take me many posts, and you will see more and more like this coming. Like this in the coming weeks and days and weeks. Here I will show the implications on Africa. As it's well known, one of Russia's business models is to prop up dictatorships and putschist regimes all around the world, including Africa, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and the Central African Republic are just a few to name. The Sudanese civil war is even directly kept on fire by Russia. The latest peace process by the UN Security Council was stopped by Russia's veto. War and suffering are not only a good business for the Russian war industry, the only operational industry in Russia, but especially for their most infamous mercenary group, Wagner. In exchange for Russia's help to prop up those scourge regimes across Africa, Wagner received direct control of lucrative deals for mining operations, especially gold and blood diamonds. The exploitation operations are executed in the most ruthless way, with utter disregard for human life, killing locals and foreigners alike, even Chinese workers. After all, this has always been Wagner's number one revenue source. However, logistically, Russia always relied on the Syrian bases to fly out the riches and fly in mercenaries. They always had to pass Kremlin when going in either direction. It is also safe to assume that much of the operations in Africa were coordinated in Khmeimim. Without this base, all operations in Africa were virtually impossible, or the very least harder to accomplish, and harder means more expensive. This business model could only thrive for as long as the puppet Assad was in Damascus, which, as we all know, is history. What this will mean for the putschist regimes and Wagner alike remains to be seen, but it might give the African people suffering under them and Wagner a new chance to get rid of the Russian influence, the same way the Syrian people ended it. I mean, I would say that the African nations, their dictatorships there, or their regimes there, are broadly in support of Russia supporting them. It's kind of mutually beneficial in a very kleptocratic way. But whether it becomes too difficult for Russia to maintain these security agreements, I don't know. It's going to be fascinating to see what impact Syria, what impact the regime falling in Syria will have on Russia very directly. But yeah, so useful thread there. And Oliver Alexander says the Russian economy is going to be hurt badly in the long term if the new Syrian government decides that it wants to be a part of restarting the Qatar-Turkey natural gas pipeline project. Wow. So this is potentially one of the reasons why Turkey has been so much involved in supporting some of the rebels in the north of Syria. Follow the money. And it could be that a Turkey-Qatar pipeline might be on the cards, or had been previously on the cards, and Russia would not like that because it would lose them revenue because there will be alternative gas pipelines to their provision. So this could be another nail in the coffin for Russia, potentially, if that happens. I don't know. It'd be a long time before something more concrete takes place, given that it's going to be absolute chaos in Syria for some time to come. But it's something worth considering. Now, Robert Fico, the Slovakian leader, propped up really by the Russians. A good Munich is being prepared for Ukraine, which will be very painful for it, according to Robert Fico. Robert Fico seems to be even more anti-Ukraine as each passing week goes. He can't help but get a dig in at Ukraine. He's an absolute wingnut. Now, in Romania, we saw that Georgescu was, I guess, repudiated by the Constitutional Court that has annulled the election, the first round of the presidential election. Now, the Romanian Orthodox Church is warning that several pro-Georgescu political parties have decided to send their members to parishes throughout the country tomorrow, this was yesterday, in order to mobilise people and organise street movements against all institutions of the Romanian state. However, I believe that no one came out in protest today for Georgescu, and in fact, this is hilarious for me. I'm not taking the mickey out of small people, but it's quite interesting how you only ever see like photos of people, you don't realise they're quite diminutive, and actually, I think this is just a revealing photo. After failing to the beat Romanian government, I think that's supposed to say, after failing to beat the Romanian government, the guy that Russians tried to install into Romania's presidency called for people to come onto the streets. Not only did no one show up, but we found out he's even smaller than Putin. There you go. So Sigma 1.50 m Georgescu. There you go. Hopefully he is a thing of the past now, and Romania can look forward to a free and fair set of elections. Now, unfortunately, it's not looking so positive in Georgia, in my opinion. In fact, some of the footage coming out there is pretty horrendous from last night, and the government has just got hardcore on the protesters, and it looks pretty bad for the protesters. So instead of water cannons and tear gas, the Georgian government has deployed groups of armed thugs against the protesters. So a lot of Titushki, these armed thugs that are invariably of Russian influence. They specifically target politicians, activists and journalists. Here, they're seen attacking the crew of TV Perveli, which was filming an attack on actor Makaradze by these same groups. Many call the groups Titushki after the state-hired thugs who attacked Euromaidan protesters in 2013 and 14 in Ukraine. And there were lots of videos of people being beaten, people attacking journalists, cameramen. It was just not good at all. More footage of government-affiliated crackdown groups walking near the location. They attacked the TV Paveli journalist and operator live on air. And yesterday, groups of such Titushki were spotted bearing guns, and I showed you this guy. They assault protesters, after which they need medical treatment. I can't show you too much because it's just too violent, and I get restricted. But it is, it's not good. Tbilisi, unknown masked people are attacking journalists and protesters. And Georgian people have that really to look forward to, and it's pretty horrific. I mean, here we've got video footage of a Titushki group of thugs attacking a politician, Koba Kabadze, in the foyer of their political headquarters, Coalition for Change. It's really overt. And these people should be afforded sort of protection as being, members of parliament, and absolutely not. Tim White says Georgia's president posts another video of tonight's attack on TV cameraman in Tbilisi. She demands an investigation. The regime has now said it would investigate as a sheer brutality against a man doing his job causes shockwave. So someone literally filming getting kicked in, and it is horrible. I can't show it to you, but lots and lots of footage of that doing the rounds. It is bad news, I think, for the Georgians there. Really, really breaks your heart. Now, going to Ukraine, due to increased threats from Russian missiles and drones targeting Ukraine's critical civilian infrastructure, the US Embassy in Kyiv has urged US citizens to exercise heightened caution. There are some rumours that the Oreshnik missile that was sent into Dnipro is going to be sent against Kyiv. And a bit of panic there. And when you see the US Embassy taking action, that's what happened previously. And it's almost certainly as a result of intel or possibly even direct communication from the Russians. I don't know. But certainly something to be a little bit worried about there. Now, war will end when Putin ends Ukraine invasion the Ukraine invasion failure, says the Polish foreign minister. So again, it's Radoslaw Sikorski, being a bit legendary, says Russia's war will conclude when the Russian president recognizes the invasion as a mistake and accepts that his goals were unattainable and that is an unacceptable cost. Will that happen? I don't know. There is a lot of pressure for negotiations coming from the US and coming from Trump. Now, I talked about this fairly extensively this morning. We're going to revisit this and add a little bit to it in terms of what took place in the reopening of the Notre Dame Cathedral and it's interesting because Trump has met and spoken to an awful lot of foreign dignitaries, both while he was back in the US and then here at the Notre Dame Cathedral. And I was watching an analysis on this the other day saying he is flagrantly breaking the Logan Act because, again, but I'm a little bit confused because he is the president-elect. But then where is Joe Biden? So there's this really grey area at the moment where Trump seems to be doing an awful lot of things on behalf of the US without technically being the president. He's the president-elect. He's been elected, but he doesn't start his term until the 20th of January. And so he shouldn't really be doing the things he's doing at the moment. And there's this sense that the rule of law seems to be just slipping away somewhat. The norms of these transition governments just not being upheld. And that is something of a worry. Anyway, so Notre Dame reopened last night, and all these dignitaries were there, including Donald Trump. What was great, I think, is that Zelensky was met with a round of applause when he walked into the venue and to Notre Dame, and that I wonder whether that would have irked Trump or made him jealous, and maybe in a good way, maybe make him realise that there is a groundswell of respect for Zelensky from most leaders, most people around the world. And he's been now given a lot of intel, I would have thought, from the American government, from the intelligence agencies, from the DOD on the Russia-Ukraine war. He turns up wearing a blue suit and a yellow tie, Trump, which is interesting because you almost always see him in a red tie. What's going on there? So is there a little bit of a warming between the two? I'm quite ill at the moment. I woke up in a bit of a delirium this morning. And I spent 2 hours awake, early morning, and I have created a video in my head talking about, because that's how cool I am, but I don't know how much sense it's going to make because I was pretty delirious, but about cognitive dissonance and both Trump support and Trump's unwillingness to accept he's been wrong ever. And this actually comes from advice he was given earlier in his life: never accept you're wrong, never admit that you're wrong. And he does that all the time. And so I'm really interested in the psychology of Trump dealing with information that sits wholly against his previous positioning on Ukraine, and how he deals with that, and what happens cognitively. And then if he makes a decision that sees a bit of a U-turn on Ukraine, and I'm not saying that will definitely happen or is going to happen or whatever, but then what his followers do, because his followers will go through cognitive dissonance and will want to reduce that. And how do they understand their sort of dear leader being initially wrong on a position and kind of implicitly accepting that by changing course? Or will Trump simply never be able to help Ukraine as much as even he might want to, because he simply can't admit that he's been wrong on something? Anyway, so I've got an idea for a longer video on that, because I think it's really interesting. In order to understand why people make decisions, we do need to understand something of psychology. And unfortunately, the reality is that humans are not rational actors. We are irrational actors and psychological actors. So there is that. And also why I think about this is because I was wondering whether Trump is actually doing a little bit of, not quite a U-turn, but a changing direction, at least marginally. And we'll come on to some elements of this a little bit later. But anyway, suffice to say that Zelensky is well met in the venue. He also met President Duda in Paris, who is the Polish president, who is the Conservative president, who is a member of the PIS, the Law and Justice Party, not Donald Tusk, the Prime Minister's party or coalition. And I presume he's met a number. He probably tried to meet as many people as possible there. But the big meeting was this. And what is... So the question for me is, okay, is Trump changing course? Or is he one of these people that when he speaks to people that are convincing him otherwise, and including particularly Zelensky, speaking from a Ukrainian point of view, Trump's like in the presence of those people, like, yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. I get that. Very human thing that we do. It's like, yeah. And then when you go away from them, you kind of forget that and you just resort naturally back to a default positioning. And so he gets back to Mar-a-Lago, and then he's surrounded by Donald Trump Jr. and Elon Musk, and it just goes back to default setting, which is Ukraine suck, pro-Russia type. I'm simplifying. I do wonder. Anyway, Macron persuaded Trump to meet Zelensky in Paris. So apparently French President Macron spent several days convincing Trump to agree to the meeting with Zelensky. The decision for the trilateral talks was made at the last moment. In other words, this wasn't an easy sell. Trump didn't really want to meet with Zelensky, arguably. According to the publication, the meeting lasted about 45 minutes. Zelensky described the talks as productive and thanked Trump for his decisive stance. And what was worrying for me is how much this man appears to be playing a role in US politics. Why is he at the Notre Dame? The combination of such close proximity to Zelensky, pro-NATO, anti-Russian, freedom-loving patriots, and being inside a church with all those crucifixes and all, seem to have short-circuited the thing, says Jay in Kyiv, who's obviously not a fan of Elon Musk, saying that he's been short-circuited. Anyway, that aside, there's no way Putin's sleeping well tonight, says Jay in Kyiv again, as these three meet. Historic day, gathered at Notre Dame. Emmanuel Macron said, let us continue our joint efforts for peace and security. This is not something Putin would like to see, especially in the shadow of Syria falling. Now, as I've discussed earlier today, Trump then came out and produced this statement, which go and check my hits and losses video out today, the first one for today, and you'll see an analysis of this, which is, I think this statement was problematic for a number of reasons. I think he got some cheap political digs in, but he also let out, from what I understand, this 400,000 soldiers that he said that the Ukrainians had lost was something that Zelensky told him and shouldn't have been let out. Now that's then interesting because that leads, that I think gives credibility to what Zelensky had claimed here. So Zelensky then had to come out and give the official numbers because Trump had said these in his statement, such that I think that's literally what Zelensky told Trump, expecting it not to be shared. In other words, that might well be the official line for the numbers that the Ukrainians have lost, which is, I think, possibly good news for the Ukrainians if that is true. Anyway, the problem for me, as I expressed earlier, was that Trump said this: there should be an immediate ceasefire. Negotiations should begin. Too many lives are being so needlessly wasted. Too many families destroyed. In other words, yeah, this is all terrible, but there should be an immediate negotiation. So as soon as I'm in power, they will be negotiating. There will be a kind of forced ceasefire negotiation. He accepts that Russia's in a weakened state, which I think is a really important acceptance there, really important admission. And I think, as I said earlier, that the foot should be put or kept on Russia's neck, economically speaking, at the very least, and also militarily speaking. But yeah, I do worry that really the core takeaway from this is that he still wants there to be immediate ceasefire negotiations. And I don't think that's to the benefit of Ukraine at all. Now, Zelensky then came out because, so Trump was saying Zelensky would like to make a deal and stop the madness regarding the war in Ukraine, according to Trump. Now, it's those elements to his statement that I think irked possibly Zelensky. and I'm reading between the lines here, because it seems to intimate that Zelensky wants that immediate ceasefire and deal. And actually, that's not what he said. And my parallel that I gave this morning concerned Trump's discussions he had held with Claudia Sheinbaum, the Mexican president, who he said he had a phone call with and that they agreed for X, Y, and Z. And Sheinbaum had to come out and say, we didn't agree on X, Y, and Z. That wasn't said, and she had to set him straight. I think that's happened twice now. And I think we need to be very careful in believing Trump when he says anything. And goodness me, we should have learned that by now. During the 2016 to 2020 tenure, he let out 31,000 lies or whatever it was. The man lies non-stop. And I'm not trying to be super anti-Trump. It's obviously true, and you can count the obvious lies that he's spouted during the campaign trail. Just consistent lies. 117% of all jobs are going to migrants. It doesn't even make sense. It's such a bad lie that it doesn't even make mathematical sense. And then X, Y, and Z, and the idea that he's going to stop the war in a day, and it's going to be stopped before he even takes power on the 20th of January is obvious nonsense. So we need to be very careful when we believe anything he says, and that includes, what he has derived from, or what he thinks, well, not what he thinks, what he claims Zelensky has said. Anyway, let us proceed. So Zelensky reacted to Trump's words, claiming on Twitter that only around 1 in 10 of Ukraine's war casualties died. So that is the 400,000 casualties, 43,000 have been killed in action on the battlefield. Since the start of the full-scale war, Ukraine has lost 43,000 killed in action on the battlefield. There have been 370,000 cases of medical assistance for the wounded. It also needs to be mentioned that in our army, approximately half of the soldiers wounded in action are later returning to the battlefield. And now our data also includes light or repeat injuries. That's a massive... and I should have read that one out to you this morning, because I think that's a massive statement for him. Now, the question is whether that's true. And if he's trying to qualify what Trump has said, then the idea is that he said that to Trump without meaning for it to come out into public. And so that, as I said, it could mean it's more likely to be true. Now, our position is for a just peace. This is in an interview subsequently, we agreed to keep working together, Zelensky said after talks with Trump and Macron. He emphasized that the value of partners hearing Ukraine's stance directly and not through third parties. So Trump so often gets his opinions from those around him rather than the people he needs to speak to, i.e. in this case, the Ukrainians. When you're talking about what should happen in the Ukraine war, you need to speak to Ukrainians about what should be happening. Now, Zelensky rejects Trump's call for an immediate ceasefire, stating, quote, "A ceasefire without guarantees can be reignited at any moment, as Putin has already done. War can't be ended with just a piece of paper and a few signatures. We must guarantee reliable peace and not ignore occupation." And I think here what we're seeing is a corrective as to what Trump had said. And again, this is why we need to be very careful when we read Trump's words. What is really going on there? Anyway, it's definitely not quite what meets the eye in this case. Now, then Trump has spoken to NBC. Trump said he will try to end the war, quote, "if I can." Now, this is what I mean by a slight change in the path of Trump here, potentially. But at the very least, this is an admission that what he said was wrong, was either a lie or was completely bombastic. But if it's bombastic, it's deeply irresponsible. You should not be promising your electorate that you will stop the war in a day if that is just simply unattainable. Like that in my books is functionally lying. And if you're getting voted in on lying to your electorate, that is deeply irresponsible. I do not like that. And the idea that he was going to stop it within 24 hours and then end the war within 24 hours after victory, that's 24 hours after he was elected. In other words, the end of the 6th of November. And now, that was September the 7th, he said that. A mere couple of months later, it's like, okay, I'll end it if I can. That's a very different thing. And you might be the biggest supporter of Trump, but you have to admit he lies. or he speaks irresponsibly. There is no other option. I'm sorry, there isn't. And I'm sick and tired of us normalizing lying and irresponsible rhetoric to in order to get voted in. It is, especially when it's so overt. I mean, this is just obviously not going to happen, and yet people get sucked in by it. Deeply troubling. Trump signals a potential cut in US military aid to Ukraine if he returns to the White House, as per NBC News. And this is another example of a potential change of trajectory for the Trump administration. Because if he's now saying that, so he promised to try to end the war in Ukraine, so that was interesting, but warned that Ukraine might not receive as much military support under his administration. So if the quote there is might not, so they might still receive the same amount of support. That is insane. Or just the idea that they are going to receive some military support is incredible. Sorry, I was interrupted there. What was I saying? So basically, this is incredible. He has gone from saying no aid to Ukraine, or people adjacent to him, and the general feeling is aid's going to be cut off, to now saying there might be less aid, which is, if there's might, so the modal there, they might not receive. If I say it might rain today, I don't know what the official intelligence version of this would be, but just in general parlance, like if I say it might rain today, I'm probably thinking 20-30%. 20-30%, oh, it might rain today. So if I say you might not get something, oh, you might not get that today, it means that you are more likely to get it. Now, this could be a slip of the tongue, right? But essentially, if we are to take his words as truth here, we've already learned that that's probably ill-advised. But that would really mean that there's 70% chance that they are going to get the same military aid. That would be absolutely mind-blowing. Now, what I was going to do my video on with cognitive dissonance is, if that is the case, if the US government is going to essentially, under Trump, do broadly similar things to Biden and X, Y, and Z, then how do you deal with that as a follower of Trump, given that you voted for him on condition of this happening and now that, or how does Trump deal with, there are all these kind of psychological effects and mechanisms taking place. Anyway, I digress. So, with Trump's announcement on NBC, says Jane Kyiv, that he will no longer be providing as much support to Ukraine, and his demand for an immediate ceasefire this morning on Truth Social, we can only read it as Trump rewarding Putin. So here we've got Jane Kyiv being very negative about this, setting up for Russia to do it all again in 2 years after a full rearming. Whereas I would say, look, if we're serious about that, at least they might not receive as much military support. That's actually better than I was initially expecting. But then I do just think he is going to try and force Ukraine into a peace negotiation, which I think is bad news for Ukraine. Trump already signalling, says Phillips O'Brien. I think Phillips O'Brien has got it right here. So Trump is already signalling he will reduce US aid to Ukraine before getting any kind of agreement from Putin to even negotiate. Now, I talked about this in my Syrian update earlier, that he is the worst deal maker. Like, the art of the deal is just, it was shadow written, but he's a bad deal maker, Trump. If you are doing a deal over Ukraine and Russia, and trying to get if you're trying to get the best for Ukraine, you don't do this. If you're trying to get the best for Russia, you do this. And then this is either he is doing a good deal because he wants Russia to get as much out of the war in Ukraine as possible, in which case he's completely compromised, and that's a real problem. But if he's genuinely trying to get the best for Ukraine, then this is terrible deal making. And if he's kind of neutral, doesn't really care, it's still terrible deal making, because what you should do is not lay your cards on the table. So you don't go in and say, they might not get as much aid, or it's not looking good for aid to Ukraine because blah, 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 blah. You want to go, well, we'll have to wait and see. And you don't show your cards. You don't give any hint about what's going on. And then when you get to the table, you've got all your options open. If you go to the table with Russia and Ukraine, and you've already said, by the way, Ukraine are not going to get as much aid as possible, then you have far less leverage with Russia. It's freaking terrible deal making, which means Russia then go, oh, you've already started at the top, is is here. Rather, if you said nothing, the top could have been here. Now the top is here, so you're anchored bias. You've anchored yourself in it here, and then we are moving from there down to what we want, which is down here. Now, if you had said nothing, it would have been this, would have been the spectrum, and we meet in the middle somewhere up here. But now you've already come in down here. We're only going to go down from there, and it's just terrible, terrible deal etiquette. So it really makes me angry because Trump is giving away Ukrainian land and leverage. Yeah, Anyway, Trump already signaling he will reduce US aid to Ukraine before getting any kind of agreement from Putin to even negotiate. He's giving Putin a leg up in negotiations and telling Putin that if Russia wants to continue the war, Ukraine won't be as well armed. Exactly right. Phillips O'Brien knows this. And if you are a supporter of Trump and also a supporter of Ukraine, I don't understand how you can think he's doing Ukraine a good turn here. If you're someone like, I don't know, America's First Patriot or whoever who purports to be a supporter of Ukraine but massive supporter of Trump, then I don't know how you square the circle here. I don't know how you get through the day thinking Trump's the right man for Ukraine. Certainly when you look at data points like this. Anyway. So Trump has also said that under his presidency, the United States will not hold on to NATO unless other member countries allocate more funds to the alliance, which they are doing. And in fact, some countries are doing more than the US as a percentage of GDP. And in terms of support for Ukraine, many countries are doing much more than the US in terms of percentage of GDP. And so if NATO is a organization to counter Russia and aid to Ukraine is countering Russia, then that aid to Ukraine, if it's not included in defense spending as a percentage of GDP, it needs to be, because actually I think it's irresponsible for Trump to say, look, and there are nations that aren't doing enough, Spain, Portugal, etc., etc. Yeah, I don't disagree with the general statement that there are nations that need to pay more and help Ukraine more. But there are nations who are A, paying more, and B, helping Ukraine more than the US. And as those two things, as a percentage of GDP being more than the US, I don't think Trump understands that and is taking that into account when he makes these, again, fairly usually bombastic statements. And let's just listen to a bit of Trump here.
You can end the war in 24 hours. You've even said you want to try to end it before you're sworn into office. You're actively trying to?
I am.
Have you talked to President Putin?
No, I have not.
You haven't talked to President Putin since you've been elected?
No. Well, I don't want to say that, but I haven't spoken to him recently.
So you've spoken to President Putin since you've been elected?
I don't want to say that. I don't want to say anything about that because I don't want to do anything that could impede the negotiation.
Which is fair enough, but he's saying, I haven't spoken to him, so you haven't spoken to him. Well, I didn't say I haven't spoken to him, but not recently. You know, so you have spoken to him since you were elected. Like, that's really dodgy if he's done that. And then, you know, that's undermining the actual president of the USA at the moment. And then he's also said, look, I said I'll try to end it. You know, I'll try to end it. Well, okay, but you did say you would end it. Again, yeah. Right, now, Zelensky, I said that we want a just and strong peace. That the Russians will not destroy in a few years, as they have already done. We see how Russia is now trying to conquer Georgia after several wars against this country. Russia still does not let go of Moldova. Now the Russians are fleeing Syria, but this does not mean that they will not try to sow death there again. The Russian military presence is even in Africa, and precisely for the purpose of destabilization. Therefore, when we talk about an effective peace with Russia, we must talk first about an effective guarantee of peace. And so how does that get guaranteed? And that's what NATO is the obvious answer to that. NATO Article 5. Now, what else? No, I'm not going to go into that. Russian propagandists, in terms of these discussions with Zelensky and Macron, the Russian propagandists are concentrating on one thing, which is that Zelensky wasn't wearing a suit and tie. So Russian propagandists have something to discuss today. Not Syria, which they remain conspicuously silent about, but what Zelensky isn't wearing a suit and why that is. So they're going off on that. And I wonder who else is complaining about that as if they are in line with Russian propagandists. Oh, it's Roger Stone. Trump advisor Roger Stone, who is a Russian simp anyway, said Zelensky's attire was disrespectful to the American people, according to the New York Post. He can't afford a suit. He wore a suit and tie to the World Economic Forum, but can't wear one to address the joint session of Congress or to meet Trump. He added, get over yourself, Roger Stone, and get over yourself, Russian propagandists. One and the same, I would say. Anyway, that's enough from me today. I need to go and drink more tea, have some strepsils or something to soothe my throat. Thank you for putting up with me not being at the top of my game today. I really, really want to do a frontline update because I think it's going to be really interesting. There's some Ukraine are taking a little bit back here around Vovchansk, a little bit here, but they're also losing stuff. And how long can Russia keep going? All those sort of normal questions. But yeah, I really want to do a frontline update. It's going to have to wait till tomorrow. Anyway, take care, guys, and thanks so much for your support. Really, really appreciate it. And I know some people have been helping out on PayPal and buy me a coffee. Super appreciated. And I'll shout you out this week. Take care. Toodle pips.